All right, so for this is why restaurants fail. And you're my primary audience. They're just
peripheral. They're battery operated.
Exactly. So the biggest one that I like to start with is just real estate, okay, which is kind of an obvious one. And again, this is the perspective here is New York City. So when we think of New York City, there's 25,000 restaurants, and there are locations that are better than others, but of course the better ones are going to be more costly. And to give perspective, a tiny little space for a tiny little coffee shop will still run in Manhattan probably at least $10,000 to $15,000 per month. Once in a while you get lucky and you get a space that is raw and it needs to be built out, and so they're willing to give it up for less. But I wish Marjorie was here because she loves talking about this, and that's what she talked to my class about. But the minimum lease is going to be something around 10 years, and more likely they want to do a 15 or 20.
Right. That's you're signing as a corporation. So
true.
If your restaurant dies, you kill the corporation anyway.
Right, and there is
unless they make you sign personally.
Right, and there's the good guy clause, which you should build into any lease for a restaurant.
What's that?
So the good guy clause basically says if you're a good guy or good gal and you pay your rent every month as you're supposed to, and 2 years in, you're not making enough money, the direction of your restaurant isn't looking very good. You might have a situation like the Second Avenue where everything's tore up and you're just not making enough money and you can't wait for it to clean up and to be better. You say to your landlord, I need to dip out. I apologize, but I just can't continue. You turn over the keys, you shake hands, and you walk away. And you're not on the hook for the rest of the money. They keep your deposit. They may keep what's in the space. Depends on how you negotiate that. A lot of people will sell off the stuff that they can sell off before they do that.
Before they decide to be a good guy.
Exactly, before they decide to be a good guy. But again, every situation is a little bit unique. But ultimately, it's a really difficult thing to think that far in advance because people get so passionate and so caught up in the idea of having a restaurant, they don't think through all the details that are associated with it. If you're going to establish a restaurant, most are going to fail within a couple of years. I think the stat is like 97% of the restaurants fail. Yeah, which is not good.
Particular to New York or anywhere?
More so New York. I mean, with so much competition, of course there's going to be a high fail rate. You open up a restaurant on a block and there's 3 other restaurants on the block. You may get some good business for the first few months, but if you don't knock the ball out of the park, the question is whether or not people will become lifetime customers, whether or not they will continue in your direction.
97% fail within 2 years?
That's what I hear. It's very high.
Wow.
It's very, very high. And the problem is, in why restaurants fail, part of the overarching part of this is the fact that people that get into restaurants have no business getting into restaurants. A lot of the people that get into it just really should not be opening up restaurants. The people that should open up restaurants are people like Danny Meyer, like Danielle Ballud, et cetera. These are people that know restaurants. We have what we call dentist money. And so dentist money suggests that,
like angel money.
Yeah, it's, and I use dentist money. I took it from Jason Calacanis, who's a startup guy. And dentist money is this idea that you have the dentist who has a little bit too much money on the side, disposable income, and their pal says, hey, you've always talked about opening up a restaurant. You should do that. And like a silly person, they do that. They hire a GM who looks really good on paper, but may not be all that great. The not so great GM hires a team that maybe isn't so great, whether it be chef, staff, bartender, managers, etc. And they put all that effort into the operation only to fail a year or so later because it's so tough to get a restaurant going the way it should and to be successful. And so, that dentist loses $1.5 million very, very quickly because they didn't know what they were doing in the first place.
It's a lot of kept teeth.
Yeah, right. It's a lot of kept.
It's a lot of fillings.
So I think the fail rate has a lot to do with the fact that people that get into the restaurant business have no business being in the restaurant business.
How? I mean, is there a rule of thumb? Like in most businesses, there's a rule. There tend to be rules of thumb, like you should have enough money to carry you for X amount of time.
You should think that way, but they don't necessarily think that way. They think that they're going to be making money right away, and they're not. It's this concept of runway. And I pull a lot of terms out of the startup business to think hospitality-wise. And they don't have enough money to last a year without making a lot of money. If you approach the money from an optimistic perspective, you're probably going to fail.
Right.
You should be not just realistic, but more pessimistic, conservative. Exactly.
Yeah.
Count on the fact that you're not going to make really any money for the first 6 months, and do everything you can to develop your customer base during that time, doing tastings, doing special events, invite your neighbors, because your neighbors generally in New York City are going to be your core audience. How do you get them engaged in your place? And part of that is also investing in really good staff, which we'll get to. If you have crappy staff, it's not gonna work. But a lot of them don't have the runway. They have runway for 2 months, yet you may not open. I have a restaurant in my neighborhood that's still not open, and they've been at it for almost a year now.
They're building it?
Building it out, which is ridiculous. Well, I do have another restaurant who took 2 years to build out. Now they're doing well. They finally opened.
Okay, but these aren't places that needed to make money. I mean,
yeah, I mean, one's the second or third restaurant for the group. Another one,
right.
The husband's a contractor, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're a first-time restaurateur and you take way too long to build out the place and open, you're not making money while you're closed. So you have to find a way to make that money. And so, when you look at each individual property, you have to be very realistic about what it's going to take to open the doors.
And at least you used to be able to cut a deal with the landlord that while we're building out,
right?
Maybe they don't charge, or charge less, or
right.
something.
Yeah, and usually you'll get a couple months free on the front end because you can't really do much, and especially in New York, there's so many. From a real estate, part of that is the construction side of it. Anything you do is going to take 2 months longer than you expect.
Yeah, if you're lucky. Right?
If you're lucky, exactly. And so
But also, I'm noticing that every place, I mean, even the tiniest places today,
right?
At least they obviously feel the need to be a theme restaurant. I mean, every little almost nook and cranny is themed,
right?
With custom this and custom. So the tiniest, I mean, you could have a restaurant the size of this, and it looks like they went for a bundle and custom fixtures.
Depends on who's doing it. There's, out of all the restaurants that we have, and we're just talking New York.
It's gotten fancier as it's gone away.
Fancier, I think I like your idea of theme, your suggestion of theme and uniqueness, because I think they're not always fancy, but they're unique. So they'll import something that is just so specialized just to make the place unique.
Right.
But what's the time? What's the material cost? Who do you have to pay off? And I don't mean that in a legal way, but you want to get a special thing for your restaurant, and you might have to have it, travel through another country to get to the U.S., not in an illegal fashion, but in a logistical. That's the only way you can do it logistically. It takes time, and it's not always going to work, the first time that it arrives. You may get a specialized coffee machine, but you're missing a part, and you can't get it to work, and you can't open as a result because your whole thing isn't together.
Or if it's just the weathered wood walls that you're seeing
Right.
all over the place.
Well, reclaimed wood is
Yeah.
fantastic, but there's also a cost. It's really expensive.
Very expensive.
So unless you get lucky and you're able to buy a barn in Pennsylvania and disassemble it and bring it together. In fact, the brother of Georges Forgeois, who has a bunch of French restaurants in the city, his brother apparently has specialized or still specializes in finding restaurants that are going out of business in France, buying them, disassembling them, and boxing them up and bringing them to the US and outfitting entire places. So Bar Tabac, apparently on Smith Street in Brooklyn, that was the case. So that was kind of a neat way to look at it. And that way you're recreating an environment that is legitimate. You don't have to do much more than that except just set everything up. I mean, of course, I just simplified it, but
no, you mean.
I mean, to your point before, yes, they spend a lot of money building out a place, and
Much more than it used to be.
right. But this is very much in line with how Americans perceive food. When we think about Zagat, there's atmosphere, there's service, and then there's the food. The atmosphere and the service are more important than the food very often. And so I can understand why people that are opening up restaurants spend that time and effort and money to create that atmosphere. But I wish they would spend more money on the staff, because I think that that's going to be more important than that special lampshade that you got. This stuff takes a lot of money and a lot of time. Construction, if you're building on a space that's raw, it's going to take a lot more time than you expect. And you're paying rent for each month that you're not open, regardless of whether or not you're making money.
I've got to imagine building out a decent kitchen is going to be as involved as building out the front of a restaurant. I mean, maybe not.
Again, it depends on who you hire. You hire the right chef and the right team, they can make that happen very quickly because they have the connections to do that. One of the bad mistakes, and this gets us a little bit into the staffing side, one of the mistakes that some first-time restaurateurs make is that they hire, either the GM hires or they hire a chef that's really good but may not be from New York City. So they poach them from Chicago, they poach them from Miami, they poach them from LA or San Fran or somewhere where they've done some good, but they don't know anybody in New York. They don't know the vendors. They don't know. So for them to exactly. Well, that's another side of it.
Yeah.
But just outfitting the kitchen, like you talked about,
Resources.
That takes effort. That takes knowing a guy who knows a guy to get that particular stove at a rate that makes sense. You got to know those people on Bowery. You got to know people that are connected to the estate sales. When a restaurant goes out of business, they sell all of their equipment. And so if you can tap into the right connections, you can outfit an entire kitchen for pennies on the dollar because they want to sell off their stuff and they want to make some money for it. There's an ongoing debate between buying new versus buying used. I'm a big fan of buying used because you work out the kinks. You don't need something that's gleaming unless you're going to have an open kitchen concept and you want everything to be pretty. But then again, you can still buy used stuff that looks good, and you can configure your setup in a way so that the used stuff isn't in the face of the customer. An open kitchen concept will make more money than a closed kitchen concept because it's dinner and a show. And this is something that more and more restaurants seem to be doing. But
how open does it have to be?
Well, open enough so that you can see the action. Yeah. It's kind of a slippery slope. You don't always want the customer to see what you're doing with the meat. They grab with their hands and they're looking at both sides and they're getting it set up. But there are some really neat aspects to that when you can sit and watch and see and discuss and maybe the chef comes out and talks to the customers about what they're doing. That is a very interactive experience, and that is probably going to do better than an Applebee's type situation where you just hear craziness going on in the kitchen, and then you get it in front of you. So, this can be really expensive or not as expensive depending on the people that you have involved in helping you get through there. You have consultants that are very, very good at bringing in the equipment, working with the local government to get applications and permits and all this stuff taken care of. You try to do it by yourself, there's going to be obstacles, and you're going to make mistakes. Board of Health wise, get yourself a consultant. And I mean a consultant that used to be part of Board of Health. Somebody who still has those relationships and who can get you prepared in the way so that this process is fluid and so that you can open relatively within the frame of when you want it to.
Assuming the restaurant has a budget for these consultants.
Honestly, a lot of them, they're not super expensive.
Really?
No, there's a lot of them out there. And there's some that are better than others, but you obviously, again, that's part of having the right team, hiring that general manager who has those connections. Don't hire a general manager from, LA who doesn't know anybody here. And that's, I argue sometimes with people about this notion of hiring people with New York City experience. But from a chef perspective and a general manager perspective, maybe a food and beverage director perspective, you want somebody that has those connections locally so that they can ultimately save you money. Having relationships with vendors means that you're going to get better pricing. You're going to get your orders in before other orders. Your request goes to the top rather than the bottom. Yeah, and you could have better quality too. Getting somebody here. Now, granted, there are transferable skills. There are people, or not transferable skills so much, but a good chef from LA comes here. They make a couple calls. They know a couple people. They call in favors where they need to, and they're going to know good fish from bad fish. They're going to know good meat from bad meat. They're not going to get necessarily swindled, but again, it depends on who's hiring who, because if you hire a bad GM, if you're a dentist, you may not hire the right chef or the right food and beverage director. Hire the right people. It all starts with your people. And that's one of the biggest reasons I think that restaurants fail, is that they don't put enough effort into getting the right people. I mean, your chef, let's talk about chef for a second. Your chef, not only do they have those relationships and those connections, but a good chef should know how to create standardized recipes and should know how to keep your food costs down. And part of that is those relationships. If you're spending this much money for your salmon when you should be paying this much, there goes the profit. You multiplied that many dishes over a week, over a month, over a year, and you're losing tens of thousands of dollars. And again, those relationships pay off. Your vendors, you have to take care of your vendors. Don't be paying them at the last minute. Don't be late in your payments. Don't get to the point where they're saying cash in order to deliver, because that's not going to help you out. Now, granted, things are tight. Work through it, deal with it, communicate with them. Don't cut them off and go to another vendor, even though people do that, because again, it boils down to relationships. But a good chef is going to manage those relationships. They're going to manage those food costs, so you're making, at least 65, 70% profit. Your food cost should not be more than 30%. A good chef will be able to keep it under that
30% of.
So your
overall costs.
Yeah. So if you're selling a $10 burger, you shouldn't be spending more than $3 on everything that it takes to make that burger. And that's not including your lease. That's not including marketing.
Okay,
and that's
so,
not
right. So it's not 30% of your overall monthly.
No.
It's just 30% of your.
So let me put it this way. There's a great graphic, and I would show it, but we're not set up for that. There's a great graphic of a burger, and it's cut into different pieces in terms of what it costs.
Right.
And out of that entire burger, you're making this little sliver in terms of profit. It's like 5%. Right. But you sell enough burgers.
Like a grocery store.
Yeah. You sell enough burgers and you're going to do quite well. But a lot of people forget about the rest of what's in that pie in terms of what your costs are. Yes, you need to keep your food costs under 30%, which is the burger, the bun, the condiments, the fries, the lettuce, the tomato, the everything. And then beyond that, you have to have the right staff, you have to pay for your lease, you have to pay for marketing, you have to do all these other investments in order to be successful for people to actually come in the door. Marketing and hospitality is anything that gets people in the door.
Well, as long as you mention that,
Mm-hmm.
and since that's the angle of my interest.
Sure.
How does that play into it? I mean, my experience in dealing with some, I'm coming from advertising.
Right.
I don't know if you had a chance to stop by.
I looked at your card actually yesterday.
We've worked with Absolute Vodka,
Sure.
Miller Beer, just Olive Garden.
Mm-hmm.
But the retail restaurant business is something new we've been moving into this past year.
Right.
So I'm still learning trying to transfer my knowledge base from here to here. And it's a different ballgame, certainly. But, it seems from a marketing standpoint, getting involved with restaurants either almost before they open the door.
Right.
At that point, they still have a budget to play with.
Right.
They know they've got all this money and they've got never enough, but they've got, okay, we can get as many chairs, but we'll get some marketing, we'll take some ads out, we'll do this. But if you wait until after they've opened, like you're saying, a lot of the time they are, like this by the time they open.
Yeah.
And they can't even afford any marketing until 6-12 months later when they're maybe showing a profit.
Right.
To have some money to go back into it. Obviously, that's not all of the restaurants, but a lot of them.
Well, I think to your point, there are some different points in a restaurant's life when they engage in marketing. They should always be engaged in marketing as far as I'm concerned. And I agree that it should happen before they even open the doors, 6 months before they open the doors, probably maybe even a year, depending on the type of restaurant that it's going to be. Because they need to put certain things in place. They need to put social media in place. And from a social media perspective, if you're building out the restaurant, you should be putting all that footage, all that content out there to start to get some buzz going, some activity, some interest, so that when you actually open the door, people are like, oh, I've been waiting for this. I've been watching it being built, and they feel like they're part of the experience. If you wait to do that stuff months after you've opened, you miss that opportunity. You may get a different kind of buzz because it's like, whoa, where'd this come from? But that's not always going to happen. And there's other parts of marketing, which is the web deals. What are you going to do to announce yourself to the world? Are you going to do special events? So web deals wise, there are coupons and then there's experiences. Coupon side of it, Groupon, Living Social, very dangerous for restaurants.
No profit.
Very little profit. A good chef will still manage to make profit.
Wow.
But it's very hard to do. And you have to remember that doing the coupon side of things, it's a promotion. It's to get people in the door so that you can woo them and get them to come back and pay full price.
Which I understand happens so little.
Well, it's because they don't get their staff involved in the process. So if you're going to do, and when I do workshops dealing with web deals, the whole conversation is really, okay, how do you create a 360-degree operation around the Groupon or the Living Social? If if restaurants do those because they think they're going to make money, then they're missing the point. You do a Groupon or a Living Social to raise awareness about your product, to get people in the door so that you can get them back, which means that your staff has to be involved. They have to be part of the process. They can't have a customer come in and look down upon them because they're using a Groupon, which happens so often.
You always hear stories about that.
Yeah, it's terrible. They need to be like, if you were to walk in with a Groupon, be like, hey, we're so glad you came here. And this is our place, and that's the manager, and that's Olivia at the bar, and let me know if you need anything, but we're glad that you made it here. And we did the Groupon because we wanted to meet some new people.
It's an opportunity to show it off at its best.
Exactly, right. But most of the time that's not the way that they do it, and it's some random marketing person or an outsourced marketing person that put it together, but didn't involve everybody. And so there's a bit of training that's not been done with the staff, and then it's a disaster.
Are restaurants doing those things anymore? I mean,
yes.
That whole market has just imploded over the last couple of years.
It has, but it's still plenty of them. I mean, just go on Groupon and Living Social. It's not hard to find a restaurant deal.
It's hard to find the promotions anymore because now, the tabs, you don't see them anymore.
I have no trouble finding them. My wife and I we use Groupons and Living Socials pretty often because they're a good deal and we discover new places.
How often do you go back? I'm just as guilty. I mean, when I was doing it,
once in a while, not very often.
Exactly. It's
because so many of them
do it right. Yeah.
They fail to woo us. There are some places that we will go back to because they did a really good job, or at least we walk by or recommend them, which is also beneficial to them.
There was also that perfect storm X number of years ago where mobile phones came out, so Groupon, which was basically a coupon,
right?
But became cool. It wasn't grandma doing couponing anymore. Now it was this high-tech coupon, which made it cool. There was a recession,
right?
So eating at a reduced price was great and acceptable because we were, it all came together.
But there's still part of it that people missed, which is unfortunate.
What was that other thing you were mentioning?
So the other side is experiences.
What is it?
So experiences, and this is what would be good for a restaurant that's opening for the first time, is creating unique experiences for their guests. So limited ticketing, so 100 seats, private meal with the chef, learn to make meatballs with Chef Luigi, whatever it is. Special stuff, and you can do that through Groupon and Living Social. Living Social used to have an arm of their business called Living Social Gourmet. They've discontinued it, but at the time it was brilliant.
That's why they discontinued.
Well, yeah, right. It's like this is working too well. Let's stop this.
Always.
But for a new restaurant, I think you can do those, and they're not as detrimental to your business because they're not giving the consumer a way to underpay. They're just giving the consumer a unique experience. If you do the coupons, it's like you get $80 worth of food for $40, then you do that too often, then people are just going to wait for the next deal. But if you give them a unique experience, a private dining experience with the chef, or you get to make stuff or whatever, it's not part of the regular menu. It's an event. It's completely different. And so, again, you have to figure that out, but you have to have good people on your team to be able to differentiate between those two opportunities. If I'm going to open up a restaurant and I'm going to do marketing for them, I'm going to do a web deal once, if it's a coupon, once, and that's it, just to say cuckoo to the world. But after that, never again. But I'll do experiences. But again, there's different platforms that are better, like Guild Group or Rulala. They're a little bit more elegant versus a Groupon or Living Social. So you have to pick those. But again, a lot of it goes back to the staffing. If you don't have the right people in place, you're not going to be able to do that properly. GM, chef, depending on the size of the restaurant, you may have a director of marketing. You have a marketing and sales person, depending on how you do it. You may do a deal with...
Especially if you have a party room or something like that.
Yeah, and you work with the hotels so that the concierges can send you business, and there's a whole operation to that. And I build those for restaurants once in a while. You have to build in really good CRM, so whether you're using OpenTable or some other system, how are you collecting information about your customers? A lot of restaurants don't do that, or they do it too late, and then they have no way to communicate with their customers, no way to follow up with them when they know that they have an anniversary coming up, and so they can't build upon that momentum that may have happened from a good experience. But you should always be collecting information about your customers in a non-creepy way.
Right.
The staffing, to go a little bit further, it's easy to find staff in New York City. It's very hard to find good staff. And the problem is, when you get staff, what are you doing to train them? And training is so minimal for a lot of restaurants. They'll bring you in based on your resume. They size you up. You look good. Okay, you'll trail Susan for half a shift, and then you're off to the races. That's not training. That's acclimation at best. I mean, true training is, this is how we do things. These are our systems. These are our protocols. You need to learn the menu before you even deal with the guest, because the guest, I mean, again, there's a hierarchy of restaurants to do the right things. You have to know the menu before you can even interview sometimes. And if you don't, then they're not going to bother with you, because that's the kind of place they are. But if a guest asks you about a particular menu item and you know nothing about it, how useful are you? Right. So there's training that really needs to take place, and systems in terms of how you take care of the customer, how we deal with situations. What if there's something wrong with the steak? What's the service recovery side of things? What if you spill your sauce on somebody's back, like happened at an event the other day with some friends? What is your system? How do you deal with it? A half a shift is not going to teach that. And so we put
manager comes around.
Yeah, right. Maybe. But that's assuming that you have a good manager. Right. Unfortunately, we have a lot of managers that we just kind of elevate because of time, not because of talent. And sometimes we elevate managers because we want them to stop being around the guests because they're that terrible. So, no, it's okay. No, it's fine. So, staffing is super important, and I could spend hours talking about staffing. We talked a little bit about vendors. We talked about construction. We definitely talked about marketing. Social media is either loved or hated, or somewhere in between for restaurants. A lot of them do it badly. But again, we had our conversation last week, and I've been thinking a lot more about it. I think we need to have a part 2 of that, and to get a little bit deeper into that.
And also the AdWords.
Oh yeah, I mean, marketing, there's 10 different areas in my mind of marketing, and restaurants, if they're lucky, do 2 or 3 of them. And there's so many other opportunities, but again, it depends on your staffing. If you don't have a full-time marketing person or somebody who's going to really take that on, how can you possibly get into all those areas? Okay, or you outsource.
Okay, what are the 10 areas?
I don't know them off the top of my head. Okay. Yeah, I do. But I'm going to reserve them for a totally separate conversation.
All right.
I spent an entire class.
That was a tease.
15, yeah. Sorry. I spent 15 weeks going through all those, and I'm still just touching the surface for some of them. And then the other thing is competition. The restaurants fail because they don't pay attention or properly evaluate their competition. If you're on the block and you have other restaurants around you, they do impact the way that you do things. And you have to pay attention to their menus. You have to pay attention to their staff. Why are they full on a Friday and you're empty? What are they doing from a promotion perspective? What are they doing in terms of marketing, in terms of deals? And you should be tapping into all their social media. You should be getting their emails. You find a way. You should go in there as a guest and learn from them if they're doing something right.
I always know when somebody's a bad business person. Talk to them and ask about the competition. I heard this. First few times I ever heard this, I thought, okay, this is just. But then you hear it repeatedly over the years, people saying this. Oh, there's no competition.
There's no competition.
Right. Yeah. And like,
yeah.
The one that sticks out is an independent coffee house,
right?
Lounge, whatever, and Dunkin' Donuts opened up, not more than 500 feet away.
Right.
And she is it. The owner who I'd known for years, I said, "Is it impacting your goals?" Oh, that has no effect. They wouldn't get. My customers wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a cup of coffee. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm gonna want to go to the lounge, but sometimes I'm gonna grab a quick cup.
Right.
At Dunkin' Donuts. And to say it doesn't affect, it's just.
Well, I think the restaurants around you further reinforce the fact that you need to do everything you can to not only be attractive to new customers, but you better take care of your old customers. Because if you do something wrong and you don't take care of them, you don't value them, they're going to go somewhere where they are valued. And from a coffee shop perspective, whether it's Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, or a specialty place like Intelligentsia or what have you, if they do it better, they're going to get your customer. If you do it worse and you don't treat them properly, they're going to leave. They might try another place. I'm amazed sometimes at how badly people are treated in places. And I'm like, why would you do that to a customer when there's so much competition and you don't have to go very far to find another similar place? Coffee is a great example. Think of how many coffee shops there are around.
This particular coffee lounge, the owner has attitude, the staff has attitude, and I know there were a whole group of us who used to go there for years and every morning, and none was gone.
All right, they lost your entire group as a result.
The whole group was gone. Yeah,
and
it's still a business, but.
And that's why when you have good staff, you keep your staff. And if you have bad staff, you have to figure out a way to either get them back where they need to be, or you need to get rid of them. And it all starts with the hiring. Most people don't ever call the references. They just go based on what's on the piece of paper. How easy is it to lie on the piece of paper? Oh, that place isn't open anymore. Which a lot of people do say when they're applying for jobs because they can, because so many places close. That person's not even in the country anymore. Okay, so all your references, if you do even check the references and you call, could be your buddy. It could be.
I used to manage the place that's not in there anymore. Yeah, he was great.
He was awesome. Great service. It's pretty amazing what people will get away with.
Well, you hear stories about that happening with doctors.
Oh, sure.
Every once in a while, every 10 years or so, you hear a story like that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes people do have to lie because they are required to have New York City experience, but they're from Indiana and they're great servers there. But until they have New York City experience, it's not. I don't see it as much anymore, but it's still out there pretty heavy for some places. They just won't hire people that don't have New York